to introduce all the speakers that we have today, all three of us. So from Chatteris Educational Foundation, there is myself. I'm currently a program manager at Chatteris, and I'm also the current safeguarding officer. And as well as me, we have Anna Marsland, who is assistant program director at Chatteris and has had the role of safeguarding officer in previous years. And then I'll hand over to Sarah Harley to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sarah Harley. I'm Deputy Principal at Nord Anglia International School, Hong Kong, and I'm the DSL and have been DSL since we opened in 2014.
Great, thank you very much. So let's take a look at what we're going to be covering in today's webinar. So firstly, we're going to be looking at the current awareness of child safeguarding among educators in Hong Kong, and Anna will be taking us through that with some statistics and facts. After that, we'll have a presentation from Sarah concerning safeguarding best practices. And then after that, I will be speaking a little bit about safeguarding at Chatteris, our approach, and that will be followed by some scenario discussion activities, which will take place in breakout rooms. And then at the end, we'll come back from the breakout rooms and have a bit of time for some final reflection and Q&A if anyone has any questions. But for now, I will hand over to Anna to get started on the first section.
Thank you very much, Zach. So we're going to be starting with a short quiz to provide everyone with an overview of the general awareness of safeguarding among educators and also parents in Hong Kong. So the data from this quiz has been taken from a survey conducted in 2020 and 2021, commissioned by Plan International, who are a development organisation focused on children and young people. So I would ask you to please use the chat box to share what you think might be the correct answer for each question. So first of all, what percentage of the parents surveyed do you think had never heard of child safeguarding policy? Do we think it was, so you have three different options to choose from here. So do you think it was A, 42.5%, B, 53.2%, or C, 74.3%? Getting lots of C's in the chat box, some B's as well. Fantastic. So a real mix of answers there, but mostly C or B. So in actual fact, most of you were correct. The answer was indeed C. So almost 3/4 of the parents surveyed, so all of them were parents in Hong Kong with children under 15 years old, had never heard of child safeguarding policy. So on to our next question. What percentage of the parents surveyed do you think would look out for child abuse incidents in an educational organisation? So, for example, when selecting schools, classes, or interest programmes for their children, what percentage of parents would look out for these incidents when selecting an organisation? So we'll take a look at the three options. We have A, 58.7%, B, 44.1%, or C, 27.2%. Again, lots of you going for C and a couple of B's in there as well. Okay, thank you all for your contributions. Thankfully, parents seem to be a little bit more aware of looking for child abuse incidents. The answer is indeed A. So 58.7%. Almost 60% of parents would actually look out for child abuse incidents when looking to choose or select an educational organisation for their children to attend. And the next question. Most of the respondents working in education, so that's management and frontline staff working in education institutions, were familiar with the policies or guidelines on child safeguarding in Hong Kong? Do we think this statement is true or false? Do we think most people were aware or familiar with the policies or guidelines, or do we think they were not? Again, quite a big mix of responses, but mostly false, and most of you are indeed correct. So this is false. So most respondents working in education were not familiar with the policies or guidelines on child safeguarding in Hong Kong. So that might include the sexual conviction record check, the social welfare department procedural guides, things like that, that some of you may have come across before. And the fourth question, what percentage of organisations, so that includes kindergartens, primary schools, secondary schools, and private tuition centres, had a written child safeguarding policy with guidelines to ensure children's safety? Do we think it was which of these options? We think it was A, 52.3% had a written policy, 62.3%, or 72.3%. Seeing lots of A's here. So some of you think only around half of organisations. Some people a little bit more optimistic, thinking hopefully closer to two-thirds or three-quarters. The answer is in fact B. So only around 2/3 of organisations had a written child safeguarding policy with guidelines to ensure children's safety. And our final question, only 34% of the educators surveyed felt that they could openly discuss issues related to harm to children in their organisation. Do we think this statement is true or false? Lots of people saying true there, a couple of falses. I can tell you that this statement is in fact true. So way less than half of educators surveyed felt that they could openly discuss these issues within their organisation. So that concludes our quiz. Hopefully you've learned something. I don't know if some of that might have been eye-opening to some of you, but hopefully at the very least it's given you a bit of an idea about the landscape in terms of wider safeguarding awareness in Hong Kong. So I'll pass over to Sarah now.
Thank you very much, Anna. So I'd like to talk to you today about safeguarding and about best practice. In an international school, we take our best practice from UK legislation, Keeping Children Safe in Education, which is an annual legislative law that comes out, and I'm basing this on 2022. We also use the Key for School Leaders and the Safeguarding Alliance that also support us in this. And for those of us that are international, there is an International Task Force on Child Protection, which also provides lots of information and support for safeguarding cases. So what do we mean when we talk about safeguarding? It's a phrase that you might well hear bandied about in school, and it's like, what actually does that mean for the students? So safeguarding, it means protecting all the children from maltreatment. We want to prevent the impairment of children's mental and physical health or their development. We need to make sure that children receive safe and effective care. And we want to take action to enable all children to have the best outcomes. How do we do this? Well, we need to look out for changes in a child and what that might signify. So I think it's important to mention now that in safeguarding, a child is a child until they attain the age of 18. So this goes across the whole primary and secondary spectrum. So they might be having difficulty concentrating in lessons. They might not be doing as well at school as they were previously. We might notice other changes. They might be wanting more attention. They might not want to talk much in class. They might become withdrawn. Mood and behavior changes happen a lot with children, especially with teenagers. So it's being aware of our students and just monitoring any slight changes that we might see. Often as well, children are very tired at school, and that can be impactful on what's happening. Mental health needs, we're coming out through the pandemic. Schooling has been virtual for a long time. This is an area that we're very aware of at the moment. Likewise, self-harming, it's one of the biggest areas for safeguarding in the UK at the current time. What do we mean when we talk about risk-taking behaviour? Children pushing themselves and not knowing the consequences, not understanding the results of their behaviours. So it's just making sure that we monitor all of these things. And it's constant when you're in the classroom or when you're a tutor. You're very aware of your students and you know them really well. So as I talked about, safeguarding is at the heart of what we do as educators. It's our first priority. So we need to make sure our children grow up safe, happy and healthy. We need to assume it could happen here. We're in Hong Kong. It's a really safe environment for our children, but we still need to be aware that there are aspects of children's development that can be impacted by those around them. We all have a role to play in safeguarding children, from the bus drivers, security guards, kitchen assistants, right through to everybody teaching and learning with our children. Everybody has a place to play. We need to be alert to changes in children, as I've just mentioned, and just remember that everybody's vulnerable. All of our children are vulnerable, but we just need to identify those that are that bit more vulnerable than others. There should be a safeguarding trained person to a higher level in every school. And I know this is not always possible, but that is the ideal that we work towards. So what to do if a child comes to you and wants to disclose something that's happened to them? If this is the first time that a child comes to share information with you, it can be quite daunting and you're never quite sure what to do. First thing you need to do is to listen. Listen fully, be engaged with the child, be supportive, take them seriously, make them feel reassured by talking to you, but don't lead the conversation. They need to tell you what they want to tell you in their own way. You can reassure them, tell them it's not their fault, they will be kept safe, but you cannot promise to keep the information secret or confidential. Never make them feel that they're wasting your time or that they're causing a problem by sharing this with you. It's about making the children feel valued when they have chosen you to disclose to. Never ask closed questions, always make sure the questions are open and reflect back what they're saying so that you use their language. As I mentioned, be honest. Never ever say that you can keep something confidential. Be very clear about, I will have to tell somebody this so that we can help you. Don't try to investigate it yourself. You need to refer this, and don't talk to the alleged abuser. Make sure you talk to the people in more senior positions in your school or setting. If there are any images involved, please don't view the images yourself. That is one of the biggest issues. You could put yourself in a difficult situation. So children might try to communicate with you in a number of ways. It might be direct, as I've just mentioned, or it might be an indirect disclosure where they're making hints at something, very ambiguous statements. You know, what if this would happen? Or this happened to my friend. So again, just be aware of children trying to talk to you. It might be through their behavior, they might be acting out, or it might be through any range of issues that we'll look at in a minute. or they might communicate with you non-verbally. It might be drawing pictures. It might be within their artwork or through play. So it's just being aware that children communicate in a whole range of ways as well as verbally. So if you do need to write a report, and I know Zach will be looking at this at the end of this session as to how chatterists do this, but just a couple of hints and tips about what a good safeguarding report would look like should you have to do one. It can be written or it can be online. It's whatever your setting uses currently. You need to do it as soon as possible after the disclosure or the incident, just to make sure that you record it as it was said and you do it straight away. Must have the date and the time, who was there, where it happened, just for full disclosure. You need to describe what happened in as much detail, but again, in the child's words, not putting in your own interpretation. There shouldn't be any explanation within it, just clear and factual. No personal interpretation there, thank you. If you've reflected it back to the child, then you can use their words where possible, because that is the first port of evidence. Really key to report any concerns you have, whether or not you report them directly to your designated safeguarding lead if you have one, your line manager, your head of school, or your head of department. So you really do need to report anything, and they will then decide where it goes next. So whether or not it's referred outside of school, whether or not it goes to social services, whether or not it's for monitoring. And this goes forward. So this is a proposed chain of referral. I'm not sure how every school does this, but this is a standard port of referral. So hopefully you already know who to refer to in your school or setting, but that might well be something to take away from today, that just to make sure you do know who your next stage is. So moving on, I talked a lot about children. Safeguarding is about safeguarding the children in our care, and sometimes that's about raising concerns about the adults as well around us. We'll talk about safer recruitment, but we very carefully select and recruit staff to work with children. However, we have to be aware that sometimes there are concerns regarding adults, and it's what would you do and who would you report that to? So low-level concerns about behaviour might be inadvertent or thoughtless from somebody in your setting. You might go away and think that was inappropriate, that those words they used to that student, I need to think about that. And the behaviour can be intended to enable abuse, intended to enable an opportunity for somebody to be alone with the child or to make comments to them. So normally low-level concerns will be put in writing again to your DSL, your line manager, or sometimes this has to go higher up in a setting if it is somebody above you. So just some sample ideas of what low-level concerns might be, and whether or not you would think this was something to report. So if an adult was making fun of pupils in front of other pupils, that would definitely be a low-level concern that you would want to address. Being friends with pupils on social media, we are in positions of responsibility as adults within a school setting or another setting. Being friends with pupils on social media is definitely a low-level concern. That should not be happening. I think everybody would agree this would raise red flags, depending on the age of the children, the environment, the setting, but having a pupil sit on an adult's lap while other pupils tidy up is inappropriate behaviour and would need to be referred. Again, taking photos of children on their personal phone. We currently have devices at school where staff can sign up the device to take photographs on trips and they remain at school. We would always advise against taking photos of children on personal devices. So just to refresh, what the 4 main types of abuse, and they do overlap. But just a general reminder, we have physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. So what might you see in children with physical abuse? So bruises, cuts, scratches, scars, these might suddenly appear, or they might be in clusters, unexplained fractures, repeated fractures, bite marks, suspicious illnesses. Children off a lot with no real explanation, or suffering from same illnesses consistently, vomiting, drowsiness, or seizures. Again, this is a pattern building up. So one-off situations might be explained, but if these continue, breathing problems, such as finding it difficult, or panic attacks. So if we could move on to the next slide. So for sexual abuse, what we might see in children are difficulty sitting down. Again, there might be marks and bruises, poor personal hygiene, not having a wash before they come to school, or their hair not being brushed or clean, needing the toilet a lot, constantly leaving lessons to go to the toilet, pregnancy. There might also be behavioral signs, so fear or avoidance of a particular person, or fear when mentioning somebody at home, sexually inappropriate behavior for their age group. Again, we can look at all of this, and what is appropriate for different age groups does vary. Again, children might just drop hints. This is happening to my friend, or what would happen if? So it's just being aware of what children are trying to tell you. Emotional abuse, what we might see. Again, these are quite similar, but behavioral language that you wouldn't expect for their age. Knowing about things you wouldn't expect them to know. Struggling to control their emotions, being very over-emotional, or sometimes actually restricting their emotions, showing no emotion in interaction and conversations. Seemingly isolated from their parents or carers, just not seeming to connect when they're collected after school, or when they're talking about what happens at home. Lacking social skills, or not having many friends, being isolated. Often as well, you might see low self-esteem or lacking in self-confidence. And also sometimes trying to actively make people dislike them because they feel so worthless. Again, not caring how they act, or not seeming to understand what might happen to them or the consequences. And in young children, there might well be issues with language development. Fourth area would be neglect, and what we might see again are severe and persistent illnesses and infections, constantly having a water infection or just looking unclean, consistently wearing inappropriate clothing or shoes. I use the word consistently. So if as a one-off, a child comes to school and they're 3 and they've dressed themselves and they're wearing a superhero costume, that wouldn't raise a red flag. But if they consistently came in with clothes that were too big or too small, or and we're in Hong Kong, but if they were in -6 degrees wearing flip-flops, those are the type of things that would raise concerns. Persistently smelly or dirty, other children may be making comments, or you noticing that they've worn the same uniform every day. Signs of malnutrition, not having lunch with them, or poor muscle tone, or seemingly small or quite light for their age. Untreated medical conditions, numerous accidents. These all build up a big picture, you know, children feeling unwell, not being taken to the doctor, having toothache, not visiting a dentist. So all of those, avoiding medical professionals. Again, malnutrition, being hungry, not having the right food, taking food from other students. And another one would be missing school. So we do need to be very aware of our attendance data and just noticing how often a child is away, and also why they're away, which is a key factor. So just some points about the four main types of abuse. They do all overlap: physical, sexual, emotional neglect. The crucial point is monitoring your students and being able to spot when something is wrong. And when you're teaching the same students every day or 3 or 4 times a week, you get to know your students really well. And you're the first point of call that can spot something that's maybe not quite right. Looking at the changes in a child, if you're teaching teenagers, mood and behavior and even appearance might change on a frequent basis, but it's understanding when that is more than a child just developing their own personality. So we need to touch on technology, and today it's wonderful that we're able to do this because of technology, but technology also causes us problems and is a significant part of many safeguarding concerns. So some aspects where it might be, it's grooming, both for sexual abuse and exploitation, radicalization, criminal exploitation being used by criminal gangs, bullying, seeing inappropriate or upsetting content. So it's really important that you have strong firewalls up to protect students both at school and also in the home. So it's important that parents are aware of that as well. Sharing nude or semi-nude photos, gambling online, fake news and disinformation, and also cybercrime. So all of our children and students are very vulnerable when it comes to technology, and everybody has phones, and it's really key just to make sure that there are strong firewalls to protect our students. So mental health, especially coming out of a pandemic, many of our students might be suffering as a result of not being at school, not being able to meet their friends face to face. So we can't diagnose anything that's mental health illness, but we can spot the signs and we can share our concerns and our findings with the people that can then follow it up. So might be anxiety, excessive fears and worries, worrying about what might happen, being hyperactive in class, in school, without any diagnosis that would explain that. School performance getting worse, grades dropping, behavior issues in class, emotional changes, not being with friends or overreacting to situations, not turning up to activities, not joining in team games when previously they might have been in the teams. So again, these overlap with our other issues, but losing appetite, maybe not eating at lunch, not bringing food in, not being interested in socializing at lunchtime, and also being tired all the time or difficulty concentrating. Some of the other aspects here as well, I just mentioned attendance. Some of the other key things are being late for school, not having a reason why they're late, just not wanting to come in, so arriving late to school to avoid being seen in tutor time, or having a lot of time off. So again, it's monitoring all those aspects. So we've talked about students, we've talked about adults, but also there is an aspect of child-on-child abuse that, you know, children can abuse other children. And it's just being aware of that. So obviously bullying, abuse in intimate relationships, so students, teenagers, there can be a dominant relationship there that we need to be aware of. Again, physical abuse, sexual violence, sexual harassment, and this can be in person or via technology, causing someone to engage in sexual activity without consent, sharing photos of somebody online, and also upskirting, which is exactly as it says, taking photographs of people as they're walking around without their knowledge. So you must take immediate action if you have any concerns, or if a pupil shares this information to you. It's referring it to the person in your school or setting. Some of them do have to be referred to the police, but that has to go through the school to do that. So just some key points about specific issues. So we need to be aware of all the safeguarding issues as well as the four main types of abuse. And these are constantly ongoing. Technology is relatively new within safeguarding, so it's just being aware of new changes. Even if it happens outside school or the family, it's still part of safeguarding. The student is our first priority. So if they're a member of our school community and something has happened to them outside of school, it's still a school safeguarding issue. Again, children are children until the age of 18 and they can still be victims. So it's being aware of all of these signs, and I've talked a lot about a lot of different signs, but it's just being alert. If a child in your care is changing in the way their attitude is, something happens, it's just worth investigating, having a chat with other teachers. Have you noticed this? And just monitoring the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So now I'm just going to introduce you to safeguarding at Chatteris and our approach. So as a little bit of context for anyone that might not be aware, Chatteris, we are a non-profit organization based here in Hong Kong, and we offer English development programs to local schools. And what this means is that we hire recent international graduates from all over the world and place them in local schools to help to improve the English language environment. So I'm going to be discussing why we prioritize safeguarding, how we prioritize safeguarding, and what we do to achieve that. So why do we prioritize safeguarding? Above all, we do this to protect the students and young people that we serve. And this includes the young people in the partner schools that our tutors work in, beneficiaries from other community programs that we run, as well as a number of other activities that we are involved in. We also do this to equip our staff with an understanding of the importance of safeguarding and to empower them with skills and knowledge to recognize and report signs of abuse and to ensure that they're conducting themselves appropriately around students at all times. For certain activities as well, we may work with external volunteers. And in these cases, we like to share our safeguarding practices with members of other organizations. And equally, we're always willing to share our policies and practices with our partner schools in order to support and promote wider awareness of safeguarding. And it's also important to mention as well that safeguarding is always important in order to protect personal and organizational reputation, so that we can always remain accountable and adhere to standardized policies. So how do we do this? Firstly, members of staff undertake online training each year. So each year, 1 to 2 members of our team have the role of safeguarding officer, and they undertake a training course provided by the NSPCC, which is a UK-based child protection organization. And this training course gives an overview of the 4 R's related to safeguarding, which is recognition, responding, recording, and reporting. As well as this, we review a wide range of sources in order to gain a better understanding of safeguarding in a Hong Kong context, as it's relevant to the work that we do. And to do this, we review the work of the Hong Kong Social Welfare Department, Plan International, and the Crime Reporting Bureau, among other sources. We use our own experience to adapt this learning to an organizational context. And as we work with a wide range of different students, including a number of different vulnerable groups, such as students with special educational needs, refugee children within our community programs, and a wide age range from kindergarten all the way to post-secondary, we needed to devise policies and procedures which could be applied to a wide range of contexts and age groups. So what is it that we do? So we have created a safeguarding policy, as well as more recently an e-safety policy. And you can find and templates of these versions are available from Chatteris. And each year we review these policies and make adjustments based on our experiences and learning. And I think it's important to mention that safeguarding is something that is constantly evolving, and we are learning every year from new experiences that we have. And we enhance our recruitment and retention procedures as well. So for all incoming paid staff, we will interview them and ask general safeguarding questions. And then upon acceptance of a role, we will ask for 2 references and ask referees for general safeguarding information. We also require a police background check and a doctor's letter detailing any medical conditions. And upon renewal of any paid member of staff's contract, we also require a valid Hong Kong sexual conviction record check throughout the duration of their contract. Our internal training is enhanced year on year, aiming to include the most up-to-date statistics, frameworks, and guidance. And all staff are mandated to take this training, from our newest tutors all the way up to our CEO each academic year. And staff are also required to sign the policies upon completion of their training. And on top of this, we have created robust reporting procedures to cover a wide range of scenarios. And we ask staff to follow their school reporting procedures as well as organisational procedures to ensure that the reported matter is followed up on in the appropriate manner by all relevant parties. So Sarah touched on earlier child disclosures, which is when a child discloses information to you. So on the next slide, we're just going to look at an example of one of the forms that we use here at Chatteris. So this is the student concern and disclosure form, and I'm just going to take you through the different sections of it now. So the first section is for the details of the person completing the form. That's quite self-explanatory. That is where you should put your name, the date, and the school that you're working in. As a reminder, this is for tutors, and our tutors work in many schools across Hong Kong. And then the second section is for details of the incident. And this, we provide a little bit of advice at the top of this section, which also mirrors what Sarah was saying earlier. So we ask all tutors to provide factual details of the incident, including the times, dates, and direct quotes from students as much as possible. And we also remind our tutors not to include personal opinion or any advice in this section. And so you have the name of the student at the top and the details of concern. And then at the top of the second page, you can see there the name of any other person present at the time. And then we have the details of the school contact that the tutor has reported this incident to, so that we can say that this has also been reported to the school. And then we have a space for the name and the position. And then the final section there is just for office use within Chatteris, and we use that to complete details of follow-up actions following the incident or disclosure. And Sarah mentioned earlier that forms can be done, on paper or electronically. Our system generally is that our tutors will complete these forms electronically and then email them to one of the safeguarding officers that academic year. We also have two other forms. So another form that we have is a staff member concern form. It's very similar to this one, except it is, of course, for any concerns you have regarding a staff member. And that one is also used to report cases of workplace bullying. And then we have a third form as well, which is a general incident form. And that one is sort of a catch-all mechanism to ensure that any incident that a tutor would want to report, they're able to do so, and they can know that a record will be kept and that management will be made aware. So I'm just going to hand back over to Sarah now to introduce the scenario discussion activity that we'll be doing in the final section of this seminar.
Thank you, Zach. We thought the best way to solve some of the questions you might have would be to have some scenarios. So we have three scenarios. One regarding Snapchat with bullying. Then we have one with a potential self-harm and one with sharing information online. So I think we're now going to go into three different rooms, and we will just talk through a little bit of next steps, or what would you do in this situation, or sometimes what would you not do, because sometimes that's just as important as what you would do. So I think we will go into three rooms, and then we will come back into the central room and just do some Q&A and maybe reflect on each of the scenarios for a couple of minutes. To reflect or to ask about?
Yeah, I was the scribe for this, so I'm happy to talk for my team. I think the first thing that we said was that we really need to find out more information from the parent and approach this in a similar way, perhaps, to any other disclosure. Although it's not coming direct from the student, we still need to find out more information, like the suspected students, are the identities known? How long has this been going on for? How did the parent find out? maybe it seems from this description that the student, her son, might not have told her. She might have found out through other means. So really kind of a process of collecting information. And maybe also it was raised by someone in the group that maybe we can consider, like, Snapchat is difficult because the messages kind of do disappear. But if the son is aware and communicating with the mother, it is possible to, for example, take a picture of a phone using another device. Like, maybe evidence can be gathered through that way, and perhaps the parent's not necessarily fully aware of that. But Anna asked a good prompting question, which is like, is the use of Snapchat or the lack of evidence of concern? And our answer in the group was that it shouldn't be, because the role of the person receiving this complaint should document and pass this on to the person in the school who's responsible. So actually our concern shouldn't be evidence or next steps outside of collecting all the information that we can, and then documenting it and reporting it upwards.
That's a really good point, Ben, because if you think about, so this is, obviously a form of bullying, online bullying, but also that with verbal bullying, there isn't the evidence that you have in the same way. And that so it's obviously often hearsay. So it is dealing with it in exactly the same way as you would another case. It doesn't matter that it's come from the parent. Thank you. So should we move to, if there's no other questions, should we move to scenario 2? So this was my mistake. So we discussed scenario 3 in our group. So I don't know if anybody did go through scenario 2.
We also discussed scenario 3 in our group, yes.
Okay, so I can just run through this one if you want to. So girl with ASN, additional support needs, has been talking online, and she's shared confirmation information. So we did a blended approach with this one. We did part of this one. So she sent a photo. So we discussed about what we wouldn't do, which was we wouldn't ask about the photos. We wouldn't ask to see them. We would report to the parents, and we would discuss this with the child and get as much information as possible before we referred it on. With scenario 2, because it's messaging, because she shared a photograph, there is an aspect whereby the parents might want to take this case to the police. So I think that's probably a very brief review of that. Is there anything from our group that anybody feels that we should add to that? Okay, thank you. So Zach, were you group 3?
Yeah, we discussed scenario 3, and we had a couple of interesting points raised. One of them was because, of course, here we're dealing with a situation of self-harming, and sort of what you could do if you felt wholly unprepared to discuss that with a student, or just like you wouldn't know where to start. And we were mentioning, especially in local schools, I think at this point 90% of local schools have a trained member of a trained social worker within the schools. And so if you really didn't know where to start, you could always accompany this child to that member of staff. And then someone else asked the question as well, as because the situation is talking about Indigo leaving during any lessons where there's tests or quizzes, and if you then discover that Indigo could be self-harming, then what would you do if you suspected that might be happening when she left the lessons? And so we talked about how that would be considered an emergency situation. And in those situations, so an emergency situation in terms of safeguarding is anything where a student could be posing a risk to themselves or another person. And in these situations, the best course of action is always to make sure that the child is never left unattended. And of course, if it's an extreme emergency situation, then you would also involve emergency services. So those are a few things that we discussed. Don't know if you discussed anything different in your group.
No, we did more on the photos, so rather than self-harming. But yeah, and I think your point there is really key, Zach, that these situations, you never know when they're going to happen, and it's just making sure that you know where to go for help, because as the first responder, if you like, you also need help and support. So it's really good to know who to go to in your organisation or school should this happen, so you can refer it immediately and get support for you as the person responding. Okay, so any questions or comments about the final scenario? Okay, thank you.
So that brings us to the end of our webinar this afternoon, but we'd like to open up the floor in case anyone has any other questions regarding anything that we've discussed today. So feel free to put a question in the chat box if you'd rather type it, or also feel free to speak over your microphone.
I have a question. How do you address like bullying that you see happening in the lesson? So, or maybe a student exhibiting like slightly aggressive behaviors and, you know, snatching worksheets out of another student's hand because they didn't give them the answers or something. Like, how do you address that while it's happening in your lesson? Or do you not? Do you do it afterwards?
So Zach, do you want me to answer that, or do you want to answer that on behalf of Chatteris?
I think maybe Sarah would be good to take this one.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, in the classroom situation like that, I would be utilizing behavior management techniques as opposed to safeguarding techniques. So those are low-level behavior issues within the teaching classroom. So if you are supporting the teacher, it's a conversation with the teacher in charge of the classroom. If you're in charge of the classroom, then I'd be looking at classroom management and how behavior management techniques can support that. But yes, I would be addressing it within the management of the classroom at the time.